Welcome to The Built World Around You, the podcast where we explore the people, ideas, and innovations shaping residential and commercial construction, as well as all the industries connected to it. Each week, we're going to sit down with thought leaders, rising stars, and real problem solvers tackling today's toughest challenges. From job site breakthroughs to boardroom strategies, we're here to share the lessons, the struggles, and the success stories that are building tomorrow's world right now. So grab your hard hat, sharpen your pencil, let's go to work. Welcome to the next episode of The Built World Around You. I am your host, Bobby Thompson, president of Thompson Group Ventures. And today is a special episode because we have Delegate Marc Korman that's joining us on the show today. And I got to tell you, folks, one of the things that has made my VP of State Advocacy role at the Maryland Building Industry Association something that's palatable, I will tell you, is that there are a lot of players in the market that are trying to do great things for not only the districts that they represent, but also statewide. And no one else comes to mind like Marc Korman. And the delegate has come out to events. He's supported local initiatives. He's come and spoken to the association and the board of directors. So he's all around just trying to understand and get involved and push things forward so that's everyone that's a resident in Maryland can have a place to call their own. So I'm so excited to invite him on the show today. So without further ado, Delegate Marc Korman. Marc.
Bobby, good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Delegate. And I appreciate you taking the time today. I know you have a busy day as always. So thank you so much for carving out some time to hang out with us on the show.
Absolutely. Appreciate being with you.
So for those folks that are listening, we have constituents that are in Maryland that are listening, but we also have folks that are coming from all over the nation. Can you give us a small introduction as to who you are and what do you do?
Sure. So in Maryland, we have a state legislature known as the General Assembly. The one chamber is called the House of Delegates. It's similar to sort of the House of Representatives at the federal level. A lot of other states would call that the Assembly. We call it the House of Delegates. And then, of course, we also have a state Senate. All but one state are bicameral legislatures. So I'm in the House of Delegates. I've been there since I was elected in 2014, and I currently chair the Environment and Transportation Committee, which, despite the name, in addition to having jurisdiction over environment and transportation, also has jurisdiction over housing and land use and a host of other issues. We only have 6 standing committees in the House of Delegates, so they all have broader jurisdiction than what's in the name. So that's a little bit our structure and my role in the housing universe in Maryland.
I appreciate that. And so for those that don't understand Maryland politics, right, that condensed legislative session, if you're in another state, your session might be a year long or whatever the case may be, but Maryland's a little bit different. So Delegate, talk us through, obviously there's a historical touchstone on the reason why that is, but talk us through what that means from a challenge standpoint to get a lot of a year's worth of work done in 90 days.
Yeah. So first of all, there's a great mix of states. I mean, about 10 states are sort of full-time legislatures, meaning they kind of meet throughout the year. Most other states are some version of part-time. Some meet every other year. Some have a short session some years, a long session other years. Some might have 2 sessions a year. They're all different sort of variants. In Maryland, it's a 90-day legislative session every year between mid-January and mid-April. And everything runs on a clock as a result of that. And there's no incentive like a deadline. So it tends to be the case that things get bunched up around the various sort of schedule points during that 90 days. And, frankly, a lot of people can look at it and say, well, that's kind of silly. You should just extend the length of the session. You're able to get more done. And there could be good reasons for doing that. But a couple of downsides to doing that is, again, there's no incentive like a deadline, right? So if we make the session longer, it might just be the case that a lot of the work just gets pushed to later in the process. And the other thing is we're a part-time legislature. We're designed to be a citizen legislature. And so if we wanted to make the session longer, we would have to make a decision about whether we want to be a part-time legislature or shift to one of those full-time roles. And again, there's pros and cons of both, but we probably couldn't just say we're going to do a 100-day session, 110-day session, 120-day session. There's a lot of trade-offs there for people who have outside employment, which is what our system was designed to do. As you mentioned, historical reasons, a lot of it was built around the agricultural economy and the idea that in the mid-January to kind of early April timeframe is when your farms are frozen over, your fields are frozen over or snowed under, and so that was the time that the farmer could go to Annapolis, the state capital, and do all the citizen legislating. Of course, we actually only have one farmer currently in the General Assembly, so a little bit of a change in the past few hundred years, but that was the historical design of it.
Well, and nothing to test history, right, with the changing of the times. So
yeah, we have a lot more lawyers now than we had in the farmer days.
Right. Well, and that trend holds true nationally, right? That there's a lot of lawyers that are on the political side and doing public work and public service. So why do you think that is, from a lawyer as a main job, a counsel as a main job, to someone that goes over into some sort of legislative branch?
Yeah, so it is interesting, actually. I haven't looked at these numbers lately, but at least in the past, Maryland actually had fewer lawyers in the legislature than a lot of other states on average, kind of oddly enough. And there might be some weird reasons for that. But I think the reason is because an attorney kind of learns in school a lot of the legislative language. So that doesn't mean only lawyers should be legislators. It absolutely does not mean that. It's really great to have the viewpoints of doctors and farmers and mechanics and teachers and all the other different types of employees workers we have who come to the General Assembly. But lawyers are trained in the sort of art form, right, or the language of the state legislature in a way that a lot of these other professions are. It doesn't mean those professions don't learn it. Obviously they do, but lawyers walk in with a little bit of an advantage in that they understand some of the structure and the language in a way that someone coming from a different position doesn't.
I absolutely agree with you on that. I can tell you that for those of you who have not seen the way that bills are written and you've not read it, I promise you it is a crash course in legalese for certain. So let me talk to you about this, Delegate. So we have a lot of things happening in the district right now, or in the state right now, leading up to session. One of those, obviously, is the impending conversations around housing, right? And with the built world around you focusing on residential and commercial construction, I would be remiss if I didn't talk to you about the housing crisis as it stands, of a lack of new homes being built to meet the need or meet the demand. When we have legislative session, there is likely going to be those bills that we're talking about surrounding around housing, and obviously Governor Moore's administration pushing housing as well, and the growth there. What are you most excited about this session that is housing related?
Yeah, so there's a lot to talk about there, including maybe how we talk about the challenge. I mean, you described sort of the lack of housing being built, and that's definitely part of the issue. I also think there's just sort of a general affordability issue, that it's a little bit broader than just that question of housing being built. So for me, a big part of what made me originally run for elected office, and a big part of my work, has related to transit. My district, which is in Down County, Montgomery County, has, I think, 5 different sort of metro stations that border it. Metro is a huge driver of the economy in Montgomery County. It's really huge in the state of Maryland, but really important in Montgomery County. So to me, a lot of what we should be doing, and frankly have already started doing Montgomery County, but need to see expanded out to other parts of the state where we have fixed rail transit, is that transit-oriented development. And so, credit to the governor and his administration last year. They stepped forward with a very ambitious transit-oriented development bill. It was one of a number of bills they put forward related to housing. This was one that the Department of Transportation was really championing, saying that, within a half mile of transit, we can do more. And we can't do that much more maybe in Friendship Heights or downtown Bethesda or other places that have already had a lot of building around them. But we can do maybe more at Owings Mill, where there's a Baltimore area subway station that mostly has parking lots around it, or some of the further out metro stations in Montgomery and Prince George's County. And so that bill would have sort of made the rule set a little bit different for the areas right around transit stations to encourage more redevelopment there. That is probably not the answer to the entire challenge that you were describing, but I think it could be a big part of it, and one that works really well with a lot of our other goals, because clearly we could build a lot of housing in very sprawled out areas, and that would maybe create more housing, but would probably cause other challenges. But building around our transit stations, that to me is kind of the right place to focus a significant amount of growth. That doesn't mean that's what everybody's looking for. Obviously, some people are looking for a bigger house with a bigger yard and have different interests. But we can definitely focus a lot of our growth over transit stations and create a lot of different housing types in those areas, especially multi-unit, and have a lot of great economic upside. And then also, some of our other goals, our transportation goals, our environmental goals, and so forth.
No, I appreciate that response. It's one of those things that, obviously at the recent MACO panel, that there was discussions around housing for all, right? And having different housing types, and you had mentioned it. It's not for everyone to have transit oriented, but it does respond to a density and a modal way for folks to get around where they need to get. But what are your thoughts, I guess, around the big 8 counties that really have the majority of the roofs, or the homes that are going to carry the load? You have those rural counties outside of that they obviously, the density isn't something that's for them. Do you see that the target that we're all shooting for as a state to kind of meet the need get addressed there as well?
Yeah, I mean, one idea that was floated last legislative session, and again, credit to the governor, he puts forward a number of bills on this topic, and he's actually, I sort of glossed over it, but actually 2 years ago he had a different bill that created zoning bonuses within transit-oriented areas. So he's done a lot on this topic. One of the ideas that came about last session that I think he's now following through via executive order is housing targets for the counties, because I don't think the need in Allegheny County is the same as the need in Baltimore County, right? And even the situation in Montgomery County is not the same as Baltimore County, although there's obviously a lot more similarities there than there are between Allegheny and Baltimore County. And so I do think there is some place for kind of statewide standards and statewide rules, but I personally am one that doesn't think we should be entirely preempting the local governments. I don't think we should pretend that the whole state's entirely the same. And so I think we do need to allow for more localized differences. We can put some broad rules in place, though. So, for example, last legislative session, we put in a broad set of rules around accessory dwelling units and making those more permissible statewide. That doesn't mean the demand for them is going to be the same in Kent County as it is in Howard County, but we want to at least allow the possibility of them. But that doesn't mean every specific rule related to ADUs needs to be the same in those jurisdictions. So, for example, if you're going to talk about lot coverage requirements for ADUs, well, the size of a lot in parts of Howard County are going to be very different than the sizes of lots in Talbot County. And so you probably don't need the exact same cookie cutter rules there. But you can have some statewide standards and then still allow a lot of local and regional differences depending on what's going on in those localities.
Yes, and I think that is the challenge, right? To get right-sized guidance for the locals to do what they need to do that's good for their environment. I think that's the challenge. I don't envy your positioning because you and the other delegates that are going to be in session having to discuss this and represent each of your districts the way that you need to meet their needs is a heavy lift, and I do appreciate you for what you do.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's comes to it with a different kind of set of priorities and set of interests. And I will just say, I remember from when I started knocking on doors in my district in 2013 when I was first running, many people brought up housing as an issue, but they also often thought about it in very different ways, right? And so housing is an issue for people, but they don't always think about it in the way that a poll might say, oh, housing is the top priority. It may be that housing is the top priority in polls, but what people mean by that is very different. For some people, they do see like a supply crisis and think there should be more building. For other people, they actually think there's too much going on, too much change, right? Others are just concerned about whether their kids are going to be able to afford to live in the community they grew up in, and probably don't even connect supply and demand to that. And so there's lots of different, viewpoints on this topic. I think it is one, though, that in the time I've been doing this has certainly grown in prominence and attention and sort of policy scholarship. And so there are, I think, way more bills on this topic being introduced now in the General Assembly and the sort of marketplace of ideas than when I first started 10 years ago.
Yes, and I think that's now because there's so much chatter about it, right? People are more informed, to your point, that they're starting to give opinions on things that they're hearing and synthesizing from all of their, the framing that they're exposed to as far as an information standpoint goes. So that being said, small pivot, because you had mentioned 2013. I don't know your origin story. I would love to, and we've had several conversations, but never about your origin story. How did you get started into, being a public servant?
Yeah, so I grew up in the area, not quite in the district I'm representing, but nearby. I grew up in Rockville, Maryland, and I ended up going to school in California because I thought I might go into the movie business and try to grow up to be Steven Spielberg. Something pretty common for a young Jewish boy growing up in the 80s was to want to be Steven Spielberg. So I made it all the way out to California and started doing some internships and things. And then the 2000 election happened, which was the Bush v. Gore hanging Chads election. And I always had kind of an interest in politics. It was always sort of in the background of just my sort of, areas of interest. And my, dad was a pretty committed Democrat. So I kind of grew up that way, knowing the importance of voting and, occasionally canvassing and phone banking and things like that. But the 2000 election really activated me and shifted my interests career-wise into the more political sphere. And I actually started working for a member of Congress in California after graduating. He offered to move me to his Capitol Hill office, and I ended up right near where I live today in Bethesda. My roommate, the guy I was going to live with, who I knew from high school, was working in Rockville. I was working on Capitol Hill. Bethesda was kind of the middle, and so we ended up there. And when I moved in there, I just did the things locally in Bethesda that I'd been doing in California. I got involved in Young Democrats and the local Democratic Party, and it just kind of snowballed out of control, I guess. And I woke up one day running for the House of Delegates. But, really, I went to law school. And when I got out of law school, I ended up at a private firm. And I had always thought I was going to work in the government. But once I was not working in the government professionally, I started thinking, if I'm not working for an elected official, maybe that's something I want to, consider for myself. And a lot of the issues that I thought were most important, school capacity issues, which have been a huge challenge in Montgomery County, funding for our metro system, as I mentioned earlier, that's been a big motivator for me. A lot of our environmental sustainability goals, our need to kind of grow our economy, all these things, a lot of the action was at the state level. And so I saw an opportunity to run when we had an open seat in my district for the House of Delegates, and knocked on a lot of doors and spoke to a lot of people and made it through.
I love that. So the old adage, be the change you want to see, actually held true. I it's rare, man. I love to hear that's where it started. It's awesome. Small pivot, and I know that you had mentioned it slightly just then, in environmental initiatives and things of that nature. One of the things that comes top of mind in conversations lately are folks are getting increased energy bills. And so when we have these rate hikes, there's two this last year, and there's obviously a lot of chatter about where we're getting power from. And there's just folks that are, because of economic uncertainties all over the world, but most likely felt right here at home in the US right now, folks are looking at how they're spending their money on their bills. With power being what it is and how we get power, what are your thoughts on how Maryland specifically can stem the tide on increased power costs and supply for, the grid that we need?
Yeah. So, overall, I think you just need to be candid and acknowledge that we have an affordability challenge. I think that challenge goes far beyond Maryland. I think it's really a United States challenge, but we definitely feel in Maryland we are a high-cost state. A lot of people will point to, our tax rate, but it's not just our tax rate. There's lots of things about our area, including housing, the main topic of our conversation here, that are affordability challenges. The energy front is pretty complicated, and I will note that even though you would think it would fall under the Environment and Transportation Committee, we have an Economic Matters Committee that deals with a lot of the energy questions in the state of Maryland. I think part of the problem we're seeing right now is the market was shifting towards more renewables, more green energy sources, and I think that's a good thing. We had many companies that decided on their own, right? They were not ordered to do this, but they decided on their own, based on market signals, to do things like take some coal power plants offline. Unfortunately, at the same time, we're now seeing sort of a push back, right? Where the regional grid operator that we have was sort of the leading indicator of this. And now we have a whole new problem coming out of the White House, but not basically allowing the renewables to get on the grid fast enough. And so a lot of the things that were supposed to come online and replace some of these other power sources that were more the historic fossil fuel-based power sources have not been allowed to come online. We are part of a regional grid called PJM. They have to approve basically plugging something in that's going to send electricity to your house, and they have been very slow to approve many projects. Now that they've kind of sped up a little bit, we have this new White House problem where a lot of these projects are going to be unsustainable because they're not going to be able to get adequate financing because there's some changes that are being made from the White House and with a little help from Congress on a lot of the tax credits around these projects, a lot of the incentives we put in place for these projects. Now, you're probably thinking, why do we need incentives if this makes so much sense? And the truth is, there's also incentives on the fossil fuel side. So, yes, we are a free market country overall and, believe in capitalism, but there's no, totally unfettered market in this country, basically for anything. And certainly that's true in the energy space. There's lots of different, puts and takes. And so, unfortunately, we've kind of seen a shift where people are saying, well, you can't have any market intervention when we want to encourage renewables or alternative energy sources. All of the market interventions have to be on the fossil fuel side. That just doesn't make a lot of sense. And it also takes much longer to permit and construct a very polluting fossil fuel, natural gas or coal plant than it would to do a lot of the same electric load with combinations of wind, solar, energy storage like batteries, lots of other things we can do. So, right now, I think we need probably a little bit more of everything given our current situation, but we should also be pretty clear-eyed about how we kind of ended up in this, situation where the market began to pivot, right, in what I consider a positive way, but some policy forces were not moving fast enough with that market. And now those policy forces, particularly the White House, are pushing back really hard the other way, and it's leading to this real crunch that obviously Maryland is facing. But it's not just Maryland. It's actually a challenge that's happening nationwide. And of course, there's been some recent articles about this, that one of the drivers, it's not just about alternative energy versus fossil fuels. A lot of it's just about the overall cost of everything, inflation, impact on parts, construction, all of that is part of the story as well.
Right. And I think and I appreciate that answer. I think that when we talk about the attainability piece and, we all work to pay bills. And right now, one of the things that's epidemic, and we're going to be in November when this episode airs. And my hope is that the current shutdown that's happening right now, there's a lot of folks that are trying to go to food banks because they don't know how to feed their family, let alone buy a new home or pay heightened electric bills. So the situation is dire for a lot of families out there. There's a lot of kitchen table talks that are uncertain.
Yeah, I'll just say the shutdown will hopefully be over by the time you air this episode, and as well as the shutdown being over, the healthcare premium tax credits will be extended to allow Marylanders to have access to affordable healthcare. But the threat to Maryland's economy, because of our outsized sort of federal role here and the amount of people who work in the federal workforce and the amount of federal jobs here, if they don't live in Maryland, there's about 50,000 federal jobs in Montgomery County. Not all of those are filled by Montgomery County residents. That doesn't include contractors. That doesn't include military. That doesn't include some of the other things that orbit the federal government. The pressures existed before the shutdown because of what's happened in Washington and the change in how the White House treats our federal workforce. And that's obviously a very large problem for the state and the region, and definitely my district and county. So the shutdown is certainly not good for federal employees. No question. It's really hard on their families. It's definitely hard not to get pay. But, they were under siege before the shutdown. And I'm afraid, even if the shutdown is over by the time this airs, that threat is still there because of how the current White House seems to treat our federal workforce.
Absolutely. Well, that gives a lot of folks a lot to think about, Mark. So I appreciate that. Small pivot because we're talking about energy, right, and energy constraints. But at the same time, one of the things that is in conversation of late are data centers. And so data centers come into Maryland being a huge burden and perceived blight on the grid from an energy consumption standpoint. Uh, in Northern Virginia, obviously, there's a lot of data centers and a lot of infrastructure there. And I think that's driving a lot of the narrative. What are your thoughts when it comes to data centers here in Maryland?
Sure. So I think one thing we tried to do at the state level was pass a sort of a study to look at what the impacts of data centers might be and how it might work with our electric grid. Which again, our electric grid's under strain even without data centers, which suck up a lot of power. A benefit to data centers, of course, is that they tend to accrue property values, and so the property tax revenue can be very helpful for the local jurisdiction that houses the data center. And unfortunately, the governor vetoed that bill. I hope we'll take another look at that to make sure we're actually figuring out what the impact of data centers would be. There's some discussion, and obviously, we're recording this before we'll air. We're talking about current events like the government shutdown. So, some there could be some developments between now and when this airs. But I know there's some discussion of potentially a data center at Dickerson, which is a former power plant in Montgomery County. There's a lot of interest in them in Frederick. I'm a little skeptical, given Maryland's energy prices and Montgomery County's in particular with our energy tax, that the economics of data centers make a ton of sense in Maryland. Obviously, that's not for me to say. It's really up to the data center developer. But I'm kind of curious how that all pencils out in a state like Maryland. I'm not saying energy is cheap in Virginia. Of course, it's not. But we obviously have some unique challenges in Maryland. But I think for us, we need just a clear-eyed understanding of what it will mean, especially for our electric grid. And I don't feel like we have that information right now. And unfortunately, a bill was vetoed that was going to help us get some of that insight that I think we really need to get if we're going to let these things go forward. But I know the governor's interested in them. We did do an incentive bill to try to make the economics make sense a couple of years ago for data centers. And so we'll just have to see where that all lands. But they certainly, there are some benefits. I don't want to say they're entirely benefit free. Again, they really provide a lot of local tax revenue, but there's also a lot of downsides. We need to really think about, what it means for our electric grid statewide.
I appreciate that, Delegate. And so last question for you. I appreciate your time. I know you and I could chat for hours, and you're a busy man, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. Is there anything that we haven't talked about today that you would want to get out there? Right now, we're averaging around 5,000 impressions per month on all content. So this is going to be seen by a lot of folks. Is there anything that you would want to be putting out into the universe today?
Yeah, well, I will mostly appeal to your Maryland listeners, although I think this applies to anybody anywhere. At least in Maryland, we are a very accessible state government, and we are, it's a relatively small state, so Annapolis is not that far away. So I would just really encourage people to come testify, submit testimony. We have remote testimony now to really get involved if they have views on any of the issues we've discussed or any of the other, topics we deal with for 90 days. Every year. We actually really want people to come and know what we're doing and pay attention and be engaged. And it really improves the work product to, learn from folks from different backgrounds doing different things. It makes the bills that we, put out a lot better. Actually, one example, Bobby, is I went with you and did a tour of a zero, I'm probably not explaining this very well, but sort of a zero emission single family home neighborhood. And it really taught me a lot about the construction policies and what green incentives we could put in place in the short term and what really wasn't going to work in the short term, because a lot of things I learned that day, and that's just because someone asked for a meeting. So people should ask to meet with their elected officials, invite us, out to see things, come testify in Annapolis, email, call, because that's what makes our work product a lot better. And we're here to represent you.
I love that. Thank you so much, Delegate, for your time today, and we'll be seeing you in the legislative session.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. All right, folks. So you heard it here. The legislative body here in Maryland is active and wants your participation. They want you to get involved. Make sure that you get involved. Make sure that your voice is heard. And so that way that the people that are representing you understand what you really think. And it's imperative for you to do so. So for those of you that are, not in the state of Maryland, please feel free to reach out. We would love to talk to you about your local area across the nation. We have friends everywhere. It's a small industry, even though we're nationwide. Until next time, folks, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for listening to The Built World Around You. If today's conversation gave you new insights or sparked fresh ideas, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave a review. It helps more builders, leaders, and innovators join the conversation. Until next time, keep building smarter, leading stronger, and shaping the world around you.